Que je continue à parler et que je continue encore à parler? Ah, pas. Okay. Sorry. Hi. I am William. I have been a developer in the accounting team for 5 years now. So I am a developer. I am not an accountant. This talk is going to be very technical, intended mostly for people who already know the ORM. So if you don't, I'm sorry. Yes. So if you have questions, feel free to scan the QR code and to type your questions over there. There is also the link if the QR code doesn't work. So it's experience 23 dash tech dash account. I will show the QR code again in the end if needed. Yes, so I think most of you are done. So we have a lot of interesting features in accounting. This is a list of things I'm not going to talk about. Some of them are just because it's in enterprise. So for instance, the follow-up reports, um, it is an interesting feature, mainly because of the way we tackle performance issues. You are welcome to have a look at it, but since it's enterprise code, I'm not going to talk about it today. The financial reports, we have had a talk about that earlier this morning, I think. Well, two talks actually, by Olivier Colson. If you didn't see it, I recommend it to you. It is interesting, both from the, well, one talk was about the UI and another talk about the technical point of view. Cash basis and analytic basis reports, again, it's an interesting way of solving performance issues that I would recommend going to see, but again, it's in enterprise, so I'm not gonna talk about it. The reconciliation widget, which was done last year, it's also something that we did using the ORM in a way that is not often used, and allowing to use code on the server for something that is done on the client in a quite clever way. The tax engine and the chart template, there is a talk just after this one in this room, done by Jos. I think you should stick around also to see if there's something. So now about what we are going to talk about in this talk. Most of them are questions that I've often had from my co-workers and other people from everywhere around about code that is existing. And yes, so we are basically going to see the questions that have been asked the most over the past few years. So something that was done in version 14, so the sequence mixing or the name of account moves or the journal entries in general. We'll see everything more in detail later. The invoice line synchronization, so that was done in version 16. It is something that is complicated. I realize it. I'm sorry for people who had to debug that. But we will see how to help you guys get through it more easily. Then there is also the payment and statement synchronization, which is a bit a simplified version, let's say, of the invoice line synchronization. And then the new features in version 17, analytic and company branches or subsidiaries. So about the sequence mixing, if you are interested also, I always put the PR number at the bottom right of the title if you want to see it more in detail. So the sequence mixing, it's basically the big name that is edited there. So what we were doing before, so it's a feature that was developed in version 14. What was done before, so in version 13 and in other modules, is that we were using a PostgreSQL sequence. So the issue with that is that it is not easily customizable. So you need to go in advanced or technical view. You cannot do it directly from the account move view or the journal entry. And yes, so we wanted it to be easier to do that. Also, because it needs to be configured separately on a separate view, when you import your entries from another software, or if you just get entries from somewhere else, you will need to configure and to synchronize your configuration, your complex configuration on another screen with what you actually imported. So this solves that. Also, because it is a separate object, the other sequence, so when you create a new invoice, it consumes a number, and if you made a mistake, so you just created a new invoice, it gets a number, you delete it immediately, you made a mistake. Well, that number is actually consumed, so if you were to create another invoice afterwards, you would end up with a gap, which we don't have anymore thanks to the new sequence mixin. And it's also customizable. You don't need to have a separate objects in the database for each and every single type that you would have. So if you want to have more different sequences, or if you want to change a sequence in the middle of the year for whatever reason, if you, it gives you more ability to do stuff. Regarding the dates, actually, a lot of people don't know that, but the generic sequence in Odoo have a lot of issues with the dates. You can set some parameters. Well, some work, some don't. So that is something that is fixed with the mixin, and we can also control that the sequence actually matches the dates. So it prevents accountants from making a mistake, having a sequence that is not actually, well, having a number that's not actually the right number because they changed the date after creating the document, or whatever happens. We can detect that, we can prevent that, we can change the sequence if needed and if allowed in the current context. And also, another feature is that we are able to resequence. So if a journal was not published yet and you had messed up sequences, you are able to just change your sequence again. So how we did that was basically we just need way of determining what are the journal entries using the same sequence and in the same date range. So that is what we do with the get last statements domain. So it's basically just getting all the journal entries. In this case, the example is just in the same journal, but we can add more constraints on the dates. We can add some constraints, for instance, if the journal has a specific sequence for the refunds, well, we can change the SQL query to have that. And that is basically it. Once we get the domain, we just need to detect, well, we have all the moves, we order them, we take the last one. The last one had number 7. What we need to do is just, well, since the last one was number 7, next one is 8, we apply that number, and that is basically it. So all of that is done simply using the setNextSequence function, calling the setNextSequence function wherever needed. This is all done using the sequence mixin mainly. So sequence mixin is managing all the the internal functions of the that allow us to read the domain and make it a set of records and comparing stuff. And in order to group these entries, we use the sequence prefix and the sequence number. So these are two internal fields that are basically computed from the general sequence, all gotten from the name. So the regular expression used, there are multiple regular expression. One which is just in this name, it's the fixed, so when there's no dates included. And then there are other expressions that I didn't put in the slide because they were too long. But they basically allow us to cut the sequence in different parts. The prefix or whatever separator that we have, the year, a separator again, the month, again a separator, and then the sequence and the suffix. And doing that, we are able to group the moves and do SQL magic, basically. Also, thanks to that system, we don't have as much locking in the database anymore because the locking using the standard sequence happens on the objects of the sequence, the internal objects. In this case, there is no locking per se because we don't need to lock the sequence object, but there is a locking only if there is the constraint doesn't well, if the constraint is breaking. And even if it's breaking, the transaction is not rolled back because we can just assign the number +1 until it works. So the transaction is just paused and resumed whenever the locking is released, which was not possible with the other sequences. So next subject, the inverse line sync. So this is actually, I think, one that was requested a lot by my colleagues because it is indeed something very difficult. So what I mean by inverse line sync, so it is when we have an invoice, we have the two tabs, so the invoice lines and the journal items. So these lines are actually the same. So the two product lines, the two first lines are actually the same lines as the two first lines on the journal items tab, but we have more lines. And those other lines, so the line that is created because we have a tax and another line because, well, we need a journal item on the account receivable, they are actually generated from the two product lines. So the way we did that, so first we did something in Odoo 13, so that was a kind of long time ago. And it was done mainly to avoid discrepancies. So if you, before that we had two different objects. We had the invoices and the journal entries. And if you had your invoice, you generated the journal entry, and then for some reason you go change the invoice, well, it wouldn't match the journal entry that was generated anymore. So in order to avoid that, we just merged the two objects, making it impossible in theory to have discrepancies between the invoice and the journal entry generated. And that also allows us to have real-time accounting because we don't need to generate the journal entry anymore before being able to see it in the reports. You can see directly. So when you edit, you change the tax on the line, you can go and see directly, okay, it created this tax line, it created. It's just a bit easier generally. but the implementation had a few drawbacks, mainly for the performance. So, for instance, when you had a big invoice with a lot of lines, so more than 100 lines, maybe 200, 300 lines, in some cases it happens, well, it would take a few seconds sometimes to edit any field because the complexity was polynomial, it was n squared. And so the more lines we had, the slower the form view became, which is something that the new implementation doesn't have, mainly because we are not calling onChange. So the issue was that onChange was recomputing everything, and every time we changed a single thing, we needed to recompute everything, compute the difference between before and after. It doesn't happen anymore because now we have the compute triggers, and so we only compute what needs to be computed, and we only check what needs to be checked. Also, because we were relying on the onChange function of the ORM, when we were importing documents from the EDI, well, to compute the taxes and everything, to be able to be sure that everything was computed correctly, we would need to use the form view ideally, but since it's not possible in Python code, there is a form emulator that is available in the test suite, but there are issues with that. So for us, it's not exactly the same as the form view, obviously, because it's just an emulation. And then it is slow, and also it's not thread safe. So there are issues with it. So the point of the refactoring in version 16 was just to make everything simpler and faster. I don't know if it was simpler, but it is done. Um, so the way it works is basically for every kind of line. So in this case, I'm showing the payment terms, so all the receivable lines that need to be added. This is a very simplified version of the needed terms. So for each kind of line, so we have the same mechanism for the receivable and payable lines, for the tax lines, for the rounding lines, and another one that I'm forgetting, but doesn't really matter. So we can define a key and a set of values. So in this case, the key is the move ID and the date maturity, which is the payment date, the expected payment date. And so we say, okay, for this move at this date, we expect to have a payment of this amount. And we can do that for all the types of lines, the dynamic lines, so the taxes, etc. And as soon as something triggers a change for that, so where we use the depends, so if the invoice date due changed, for instance, well, it will trigger a recompute of the needed terms. So the field will be set as dirty. So, and as soon as it is dirty, we will check and make the difference between the fields. So if we have anything that doesn't impact the payment term, we won't recompute the payment term lines. Once we have that field and we are able to know, okay, we know we need this amount for the needed, well, for the payment terms, we can go and say, okay, well, before I needed this, I do the changes. So I change, for instance, the invoice date due. I say I don't need it on the 1st of September, but I need it on the 1st of February. We write it on the move, and then we check again. So we do exactly the same thing, and I see, because I changed the date due, I see that these two fields have been recomputed, so the needed term is dirty. And then I see the new needed turn lines. And once we are able to see before and after what was needed before, what was needed after, we can compare it and modify, create or delete the lines that were created before and have the new lines. So this is all done using Context Manager. So it is basically what's so the Sync dynamic lines is just a stack of all the context manager for all the different type of lines that we can have. So again, payment terms, tax, discounts, and the others that I'm forgetting. And we are just stacking all the things. And so the Sync dynamic line, so there is a difference. This is the plural, this is the singular. That's the most obvious. But basically, it will just read the needed terms here and compare it and see the difference and create or delete or modify the existing lines. And that is all that is doing. And so this context manager is basically called in the create and write function of both account move, so the journal entries, and account move line, so the journal items. And that is basically it. There is also a mechanism that prevents having recursion. So we only do it on the top level call, on the top level creates or writes call. Even in account move, if we write in account move and then that triggers a write in account move line, then we don't trigger it again for account move line. So that is also optimization. And because this is only done in creates and writes, so it's not done in unchange anymore like before. We don't recompute everything every single time we do a single change in the interface. And so the way to trigger the difference is when we are in the tab view, in the different tabs. It's basically that when we change the tab, we trigger a save. So that allows us to edit the different lines very quickly without having to recompute everything every time you change a single field. But it also has the cost that it sort of breaks the revert functionality. So if you change a tab, you cannot revert anymore because it's saved. And yes, and in order to do that, there is also a mechanism that I added to extend, in some words, the ORM, which is basically, I like to think it's as what is written below. So when you compute the name, so the name of account move lines or journal item can be by default either the name of the product or the payment reference. So for a statement line, a payment term line, it will be the payment reference, but for a product line, it will be the name of the product. So what I have developed using the conditional add to recompute was, well, in the case it is aligned with the products, we will trigger the dependence or the recomputation of the field if the product changed. And if it is aligned with, it is a payment term line, so a receivable or payable line, we will trigger the recompute of the compute name if the move ID or the payment reference of the move changed. So that is why I also said that it is more declarative. It's because we only have 1 point of computation for each field. We don't need to check where does this field, how was it computed, where does it come from. It always comes from the compute function of that field. And so the way it was implemented was just, well, we trigger the conditional recompute when the payment terms change. We will recompute the name sorry. If the payment reference changes, we will add the name to recompute if it was a payment term line. Yes. So now there is another synchronization that happens, and that is a bit less complex. So for the payments and the statement lines, which actually also creates a journal entry, we also want it to always be in sync. We have a similar kind of mechanism, but it's a lot easier because there is a lot less fields. We don't have the lines to control, so we don't have multiple product lines in a single document that we need to synchronize. It's also to have real-time accounting. So the reasons why it is done are the same as for the invoice lines synchronization that we just saw, but it's just easier. We could also maybe in the future, I don't know if we will do it. I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't know. We could do it with the assets depreciation and with expenses, because it's also a kind of similar mechanism. We have one amount, one date, and it follows the mechanism, a more generic mechanism. So the way it works is that we use some composition-based inheritance. So what I mean by composition-based is that we have inherits with account move and account move ID. So it's an object that has it's not a it's a 1 to 0 relation, and so it just adds some metadata, and from that metadata we will be able to compute the journal entry. So it is kind of the same thing. So in the write and the create methods, we have some synchronization. That synchronization we have synchronized from moves and then synchronized to move. That happens on the model. We read the values of the account payments, and we will write them on the move here. And we have the same mechanism the other way around. There is also some recursion mechanism that we want to avoid. Well, we want to avoid recursion, and it's possible that thanks to that mechanism. So we can come now to more recent features, because everything else was for version 16 and before. So the cross-analytic plans that you probably have heard about earlier during the Odoo experience. So it is basically being able to do group by multiple, well, cross by multiple plans. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I recommend going and seeing what's new in accounting, the talk from Winand he did yesterday. Yes, so we will mainly see, how it was done and why we did it. So we had a big refactoring of analytic in Odoo 16. Basically, we kept the same design for the analytic lines, so keeping, reducing the size of the migration. It seemed simpler at the time. We thought most cases would be covered, but obviously we were wrong, so we had to correct that. And yes, basically we just wanted to keep something simple, but we realized that it was not possible, it was not good enough, so we had to do more, and while keeping everything simple. So the solution was actually quite simple, and Actually, this is almost the entire code of the feature. Well, maybe not entirely, but mainly the only trick was when we create a new analytic plan, we just need to create a new column on the analytic items. So when we have, this is basically roughly the view of an analytic item. So we need to create a new column. We have a column for the projects and a column for the departments. Because we have a new plan, we need to have a new field. And that allows us to do some cross-buy. So the solution is actually simply to use the Odoo Studio features. So it is just adding a new field, keeping it in sync with the plans. So whenever we create a plan, we modify a plan, we need to, or delete a plan, we need to create or change the name of the column. Because we are creating those, well, we have columns now, so we don't want to have too many columns, so the plans need to be shared between the companies. They are shared, but we can still hide them easily, so we can just activate thanks to the configuration of the analytic plans, which already existed. The only thing was that before the configuration was company specific. Now it's, well, it was on the plan, and now we had to make the configuration company specific. That is only a minor change. And once we have those fields, well, we just need to be able to have all the views dynamically generated, or at least dynamically modified, to be able to see all the fields how we want to see it. One small trick was also to keep the widgets backwards compatible just for the upgrades. So what I mean by the widgets is the storage in the database. So it was a JSON format. We kept the same JSON format just by, so the format was a JSON. The key is the ID of the plan, the accounts, and the value is the percentage. Well, now it is just a comma separated value with the IDs of the accounts, and it keeps it backwards compatible easily. It is nice to note that for most cases, when in version 16 distribution was made, during the upgrades, we are doing the best possible, well, what the best we could do to make the lines cross, well, to merge the different analytic lines depending on the accounts and put the right accounts in the right columns, so that the reports would be enabled automatically when migrating, well, after the migration. And there is also a magic field which is called Auto Account ID, which is basically just allows you to set the right account. No, I don't have a slide for that. So it is just setting the right account in the right column automatically, and it allows also to use the ORM correctly by having many-to-one fields. Yeah, I should have been given more details about that, but I encourage you to see the definition of Auto Account ID if you are interested. And the last feature are the company branches. So again, well, the reason why we did it. So the first reason was that in some countries, including India, that was the first one we noticed. When we have, well, when a company has subsidiaries in different regions or different departments, the subsidiary needs to file the tax reports in that department. So it's not the main company that needs to file the tax reports all at once. It's each subsidiary who has to file the tax report. So because of that, we needed to be able to have account moves having one, well, being in the same company, um, but also being in a subsidiary at the same time. Um, and at the same time also, those companies are actually using the same chart of accounts. So all the financial reports are the same. So it's some kind of consolidation, but easier. And yes, um, the implementation that we chose was to use the company IDs because a branch is a sub-company. And that actually allows us to do also more things. So the branding of the company. So if you have PDF formats for the each company or each branch, so you sell different products, you want a different branding, that is doable thanks to the branches because it's the company field which controls a lot of things in Odoo can be different, and so it just gives you more possibilities. And it also gives more granularity for access rights, so an employee can have access only to one or multiple subsidiaries, or not have access to the main company, and you can do almost whatever you want with the branches regarding access rights. And even if you have, yes, I'll come to that later. The Yes, and it is not fully customizable. We will come to that later. So actually, there was already a parents field on the companies before that was not used. I myself have no idea why that field existed, but we used it. So basically, it is just a hierarchy, so we can see it easily on the widget. So we have hierarchy in the companies. We can have more than 2 levels in this case. And by using that, well, that is basically everything that all that was done on the company field. So it's just adding more tooling for the parents and stuff like that. But the main trick was actually the ORM, making it compatible with the ORM, because the ORM is on a lot of models. Well, there is a feature that checks that the company of a record is the company of all the related records. So for instance, you cannot put an account that is not of the same company as the move you are trying to put the account on. So if we have different companies or different branches, it would have been impossible to put an account from the main company on an account move registered in the subsidiary. So the whole trick was just to be able to modify the check company function, and the check company function is now using the check company domain, which is defined on each and every model. So on every model that we want to change. So by default, it's just company ID in the companies. And we just need to check that the records match the company. And if it's not the case, then we raise an error just exactly like before. So the change is just that before this line was corecords.company ID equals company. It was roughly that. So the change is just this line here. And the same for the domain. So there is a feature also on the fields definition. If you put check company on the field definition, it automatically adds the company domain, which is always the same domain. So it's the check company domain. to the fields domain, and when you are in the view, you will only see the. So with the same example, if you put an account, you will only see the accounts that are compatible with the journal entry that you are editing automatically, and it will be done everything automatically. So because this is now customizable, we should never put a domain explicitly in the code base, at least for all the models that are susceptible to have that are being shared between companies. We should never put a domain with company ID equals something. We should always use the function check company domain, because that is what will be checked in the end by the ORM. That is what will be checked the that is the rule that is set. And so the only thing that needs to be done now is just to declare, okay, the accounts, instead of company ID equals company IDs. So company IDs is the IDs that I have selected in the company selector. Well, before it was equal, now it's just a parent of. So I can see all the accounts of the company or the subsidiary that I have access to, and all the accounts of the main company of that subsidiary, if it is a subsidiary. And we have to do the same on the model definition. So the check company domain, it is just a function defined in the models. And whenever we have a model that is susceptible of being used from the main company on a document recorded in a subsidiary, we just need to add the domain. Yes, and so it might need some customization in some cases, because there is some Python code linked to that. It's an easy customization. It was done like that to avoid having people doing too many customization and it getting out of hand. I didn't make that choice, but that's how it was done, and that is how it is. And that was basically it. If you have any questions, feel free to connect. I will answer to any messages. And if you have more direct questions, feel free to ask them right now. Wait.
C'est bon? Okay. Thanks for your question. So first question first. Can we override sequence index to allow duplicates? So for special localization rules.
Yes, it is actually done in the Latin America countries. It is not easy to do because, of course, it is constraints in SQL, but it is done in the module. It is LTN LATAM something. So the way it's done is just removing the constraints and adding a new one, different one. It is not the cleanest solution, but since there is only one country, well, one group of countries that have that issue, to our knowledge, it was good enough at the time. We might do something better in the future, but for now, it's like that.
Okay, thanks. Next question. So with context manager method, is there a way to inherit and change lines results, adding, modifying, or deleting lines created like a super call?
It is possible. So if we want to do that, we just need to change the functions, the compute functions. So if we come back to here. So we would just need to inherit the compute needed term. So if you want to have more lines or to have more details or to have a different key, for instance, we want to add analytics into there, well, we just need to change the needed term, the key of the needed terms to add, okay, for this move with these analytics settings, I just need to add that. It is actually done in quite a few modules. I have in mind expenses. So for instance, or with fleet also, when we have lines linked to a vehicle or to an expense, we want to compute things differently depending on the expense or the vehicle. And in that case, we just need to change the compute function of the. It is done in a lot, well, in a few places, mostly for the taxes, the computation of the taxes. But that is the only thing that should be changed generally.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of questions about company branches. The first one, small one here. New check company features avoid needs to define company depends definition on a related field.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
So the new check company features
Yes.
avoid needs to define company dependencies definition on a related field.
So it doesn't need to be defined on the, well, it needs to be defined on the related field. So for instance, if we want the accounts to be, yeah, I don't have an example here, but so on account move, we need to put the check company auto on account move, and then on the field of the journal item, so the account move line, we will need to put on account ID check company equals true, if that was the question, and then it will ensure that the company of the account is the same or is compatible with the company of the journal item.
Thank you. Another company branch question. So company branches for user rights works the same as multi-company. So I have to add the branch at user settings, or if the user has the right to the main company, has rights to all branches. A lot of questions here. So I repeat again.
Can you start with the first part?
Yeah, so company branches for user rights works the same as multi-company.
Yes, so it is exactly the same thing. So the user rights are exactly the same. It's the same mechanism. Nothing has changed regarding that. But you can have a different access because you can have access to some records of the parents. But yes.
So does he have to add the branch at user settings, or?
It is exactly the same thing. So in the user settings, you can add multiple companies branches. It's in the same field actually. So in all the companies of the companies of the user, you can add companies branches, and that is what you have access to.
Okay. Did you modify something else regarding company domains to prevent access to specific company branches, or just the company ID at the user? Yeah, is answered indeed. Another one, someone is typing. Are company branches the same as operating units?
That is a good question. Like I said, I'm not an accountant. I'm not familiar with the terminology, and I think it is different. But
if it's more functional, there is a booth just
yes,
right in the corner here. Just
yes.
Here. Slightly off topic here, but company branches, can you transfer products tracked with serial numbers, lots from one branch to another? Maybe more functional here.
That's a bit technical. The serial numbers. So
can you transfer products tracked with serial numbers and lots from one branch to another? So how does inter-branch logistics work, basically?
That is a very good question. Basically, you should be able to transfer from one branch to another if it wasn't used in another branch. So if we keep the constraint that the product wasn't used in another branch. So for instance, you should be able to put one product from a branch to a parent company or parent branch, but you should not be able to do it the other way around if it was used in a company that's not compatible with the company that we are trying to set it on.
Okay. That was the last question. Thanks for the call.
Cool. Thank you.